All right, well, thank you guys for coming today. Of course, this is an XR Creators event. We are looking to have speakers or, topic-focused events every other Saturday. It usually switches from 3 to 4 EST, so whichever time zone you're in now or an hour from now. And we have John Shull here today, so I'm very excited to hear him talk. It's going to be really interesting. And this is the first speaker event that we've had after me. I was the first one, but so John's officially our first one, and so we're all very excited to have him here. So John is a senior project scientist at the Virginia Modeling Analysis Simulation Center. He does a lot of research in virtual environments, how game engines can be used for advancements in education. He looks at data visualization and, really just looking into how we can recreate environments and interact with them in a way that is multisensory and really immersive. And so let's give a virtual round of applause for John.
Thank you for that introduction, Mia. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to fumble through a little of this because we are going to be using some images to make sure you guys can see them. I was kind of working around a slideshow, but we realized we've got some troubleshooting. We got to figure that out later. So anyways, all right, so thanks for joining me today. So my name is John, as Mia was talking about, and I am a senior project scientist at VMASC, for short, Virginia Modeling Analysis Simulation Center. So I'm basically going to be talking today about some of the work I did with a specific group at an organization called the Digital Senses Group and a project called Visualizing the Deep Past. So VMASC, top left. So a little background about VMASC first. It's a multidisciplinary research center. It focuses on modeling, simulation, and visualization. So as a research center, we've been here for about 20 years, going on 21 this summer. We have a dedicated collaboration space that's always being reconfigured for the various projects we have going on. So that's kind of what you see in this picture right here. So we have a brand new motion capture up in the ceiling. It's about 6,000 square feet. We have a huge wireless VR space. We can pretty much do up to about the entire space now with the new Steam tracking system, as well as with the mocap system. We could expand that out as well. So we have some fabrication equipment for 3D printing, power tools, laser cutting, that type of stuff. So VMASC is basically part of a university called Old Dominion University. It's a Virginia State public university. It's located in Norfolk, Virginia. VMASC is in Suffolk, so we're a separate division. So that's why I've got this map up here, right? So we've got the East Coast, Virginia, some down in here. We're in Suffolk, right? So it's ODU, we have a big old battleship. So the area that we're associated within is called Hampton Roads, and I live in another city called Chesapeake. So I talk about location because it's a great segue into how we're having this kind of presentation, right? So we talk about sight and hearing. So in VR, you see my representation in a simulated 3D stereo through your headset, and some of you guys may be in a monitor as well. So you hear my voice as it comes through your left and right channels, a little Doppler spatial effect maybe is going on. You're constantly building this mental image of who I am, right? So currently this is being done primarily by 2 dominant senses, sight and hearing. So I want to talk a little bit about me. So let's factor in a little more information. So I have a dog, I've got a cat. I've been married to my significant other for about 8 years, going in December. So now you're factoring in my age, you're associating it with someone you maybe know, maybe you don't know. So perception is very interesting. So, what is perception? So, just Google it, right? It says the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. See and hear, and then some other senses. Well, now, if wait a second, you're telling me that general perception is just through the eyes and ears? That can't be the case, right? Obviously, we know about our 5 senses. But for the most part, researchers have pretty much stuck to those main primary senses. And it hasn't been until very recently that we started to really explore this area. So last year, there's been some researchers starting looking into the bias that comes in with these other sensory research projects. And they've been able to show that vision has been getting just a really strong bias. And a lot of the repeatability of those studies have been kind of proven contradiction, which that's not a good thing in research. So, we're really interested in how do we get rid of some of this bias. So with perception, let's at least start with the bias senses, right? Because that's all the ones we know. So, eyes and ears. You're watching me, virtual stage, you're listening to me ramble on. Now, when I say we're here, what does that even mean, right? So let's break that down a little bit. Let's think about how we escape in a good book, a good movie, a good conversation, a good game, a good VR experience, right? All right, so we're talking about VRs now. VR's a little different here. So physically we're somewhere. So currently I'm in my office, right, somewhere in Chesapeake, Virginia. While at the same time I'm mentally thinking about this presentation I'm currently giving, so this is mental space, but then virtually we're in this simulated environment as well. So we're bouncing between these kind of three states currently. So I mentioned a book earlier, right? So a book is similar, but the embodiment that VR provides adds this new layer of dimensionality to this mix. A movie is similar, great sound, nice visuals, but linear, the interaction is very limited. So it's interesting, Netflix has been playing around with this sort of choose your own adventure movie, right? The Bandersnatch series that came out, very much, choose your own adventure storybooks as well. So what about interactive theater? Now that's pretty close, right? So there's this one-to-one physical representation of where I am. All of the immediate senses are being enacted and played around with. Now there is no virtual layer currently. I've seen some augmented reality interactive theater, which is pretty interesting. But interactive theater is about as close as we can get to what a VR sensory experience can be currently. So what we're really talking about is the general notion of simulation. So again, so what does here actually really mean, right? So we're talking now maybe a little bit out of body-ish. So I'll be the first to tell you that this is very not much a technology problem, and it's not my immediate area of expertise. This is so much more of a philosophical discussion problem when we get into this kind of out-of-body and the multiples of senses and how these senses come together. So let me kind of pause there and let me kind of ground a few things based on some modern research and make some claims to keep us somewhat on track. So a few of us at VMASC and some other researchers from a few different fields are thinking about this sort of question. So my perspective and some others at VMASC is that it's really about how we evaluate this from a sensory perception mindset. So I need to give some credit where credit is due. We're basing a lot of our research on some really big researchers in the field, and I have to make sure I mention the work from Jeremy Bailenson out of Stanford. Look his group up when you have some time. They're doing some really cool stuff with embodiment, and they're really doing longitudinal studies that I think are of significant impact in VR going forward. Okay, so with that, we're here. We're in this shared space. You're listening to my voice. We're virtually seeing my discrete, simple hand gestures, which are very, missing all the subtle nuances. I can basically give you a thumbs up. I can point at you. That's about it, right? So we're building this perception of what this is. We're taking all of these inputs of all these things within one sensory perception bubble, and we're picking up from the various sensory channels. And I'm going to cite some work by a philosopher called Barry Smith. So he's made his career diving into the philosophical of perception. So he's up here doing a TEDx presentation at Oxford. And he argues that there's actually way more than just the five senses. And some other people are claiming that we have somewhere between 22 and 30 senses. Like, that's kind of crazy if you think about it. I can't even name them all, to be honest with you. Let's talk about like how this works in terms of like a black box effect. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term black box. But basically, we don't know what's going on inside the black box, right? We can put some stuff in on one end, we can watch some stuff come out on the other end, and we can make some very good educated guesses on what's going inside. So in VR, we're basically treating this whole experience with the three main ones: sight, hearing, and then haptic. Fake, crappy touch, basically, right? Sometimes we experience this in other form. There's another sense that sometimes does come in, and it's usually, we think of it as a bad thing in VR. It's kind of a side effect, right? Loss of balance. So bad VR can get your sense of equilibrium, throw it all off. That's a sense. Look that up. It's actually pretty cool. They've done some lot of research on how that is a very important sense to our day-to-day interactions and how we really forget about that until we're nauseated. And then we all of a sudden remember that we have this inner ear thing going on, right? So these inputs, they come in through our black boxes of our senses. You see a thing being driven by technology, affected by network lag, limited by the capture of this technology. You don't see my face. My eyes are on some random blinking thing here, not yet at least. My subtle facial motion, the slight twitch of my eyebrows, you're missing all that. So you process the information you have in such a way that your brain has been used to all along. So we compare everything we're doing in VR basically back to the real world. And by that very nature, we're just simulating these experiences in constant real time. So this kind of gets at the heart of how we human. And in our sliver of time, we experience these VR experiences in a way where we're always comparing them to past experiences. So we're constantly recreating, we're constantly simulating all of these past experiences in real time, all the time, to other processes, what's going on. So to help explain this a little bit better, I like to think of this one kind of example that I think a lot of people have been related to. So let me pull up a little bit of sensory map information here. So this is a sensory map. And this is work done by Kate McLean, and it's pretty wild what she's been able to do. And she basically uses crowdsourcing in people in neighborhoods, and she gives them kind of questionnaires, and they walk around and they basically document how things smell. And then she can build a kind of living sensory map of your location in your home. And she does this all very crowdsourced methods. So this is just a visualization of the representation. So we saw some of her work. She's been doing this for quite a while now. We were kind of thinking about that a little bit as well as we kind of dived into our own stuff. All right, so back to this example I had in my head. So you're driving your car, right? Same route every day to and from work. Every day our brain starts build this map, a sensory map, right? We see the work up here. We're thinking about our senses as we're experiencing repeated events. So this starts to cycle over and over and over again. And our brain begins to basically optimize these things. We perceive time differently in these areas as things that we're generally overly exposed to. So the same route, the same way, every day, generally causes our brain to basically go into autopilot mode, right? Versus what a new experience would be. So this really gets at the heart of another area of research that I'd love to dive into, but I've already been rambling on enough, so I can't go down that road too much, but also put something in your head about the perception of time. So I'm going to glaze right over that and just tell you that for the most part, when we experience something kind of new or different, like traveling to a new place, the brain generally perceives time slower. So there's research in flight and fight. So they've shown this. So people recount these really bad car accidents as like time slowing down, right? They can see everything in like micron seconds as they're going over minutes of time. So this perception of time is really fascinating. And even more recently, there's been some research into how we can recreate events from memory when we're actually not really, I don't know how to explain this. The idea that a memory is nothing but a resimulation of some level of inputs from a past experience. So the idea is that you have a JPEG, right, as a picture, and you save it as another JPEG. You save it as another JPEG. You keep doing that, eventually JPEG turns into like junk, right, because you're degrading the quality of that image. So there's this consensus out there from some researchers that think that a memory is nothing but us just resimulating it over and over again. So they make the claim that the best memory you have is the one that you don't recall the most, which I find very weird and very fascinating. And that's from some research that deals with people that are trying to pretty much I won't say erase a memory, but reduce its impact. So there's been some work in PTSD on that. All right, so I've been going on. So let's get back to driving, right? So I'm on my way to work. Brain goes, okay, things appear the same. Let's optimize this. We get in our own little autopilot mode as we drive, right? So we start optimizing our drive. I don't remember a lot of these pictures, by the way. I was looking through my phone the last few years, and I realized I took a lot of the same pictures, me and my dog in the car. So I'm in the car, right? I get a phone call right in the middle of a familiar drive. I'm pretty close to work. I get the call. It's an important call. Well, at least I thought it was important. A few minutes later, I get off that call, and I look up, and I go, where the hell am I? I don't even know where I am. How did I get here, right? Like, I've just been driving this whole time subconsciously. So I'm lost, right? Or I missed my turn. So this happens. This happens to a lot of people. And there's a lot of stuff going on right there. Basically, your brain's in autopilot mode. All of the sensory experiences that you're experiencing in that road and that autopilot, they're the same. It's basically, you didn't see a new crazy sports car. There wasn't a weird smell. There wasn't like a really loud siren or something that distracted you or caught your attention. So there's this idea that there was no disruptions to that status quo, right, of me driving. Hence why I was able to just nonchalantly miss my turn. So I was going through these pictures again, and I realized I saw this one, and I go, oh, I remember everything about that picture, right? Now, why? The double rainbow, right? So the theory here is that because of the way that our sensory perceptions are played with or used, that a different sensory experience will end up being basically remembered up front, and then over time we might degrade that a little bit. So when I saw this rainbow in the pictures, I remembered exactly what was going on that day. So as I'm doing this, right, I'm looking at this picture and I go, oh man, I just remember, 10 minutes before that, it was a downpour. The highway was at a standstill. There was like 6 inches of water. The water was rushing faster than I could get through. And as I came around the turn, we made it way through the storm, and this kind of clouds kind of rolled out. So in where we are in Virginia, these storms can roll in pretty quick, kind of like in Florida, and they can be gone pretty quick. And I remember seeing this rainbow and being like, okay, right, that's pretty cool. I'm going to take a picture of that real quick because I have a little camera on the front of my car. All right, so So I've compressed a lot of research right here in this little fraction of time, and what I really want to kind of get at is kind of what we're interested in. So this is just a little bit of a theory, and this isn't, I can't take any too much credit for this. This is kind of amalgamation of things. So it's how we experience such things, and what I like to hold up this idea of, again, of perception through senses. And following with this idea, we're really always relating our current physical virtual experiences and grounding back to whatever our black box of a sensory perception engine thinks it is, right? Whatever's normal for that, and we're all different there. So, and then we optimize, and we begin autopiloting through the world. That's basically what the simplified diagram shows. So we have some stimulus coming in, right? Our sensory system's going, all right, putting this all together, we come up with this perception of what's going on. Have we experienced that before? We haven't. All right, let's process that a little bit. Let's think about that. Let's make a little memory of this event. Let's then put it into our little bucket of what we think is going to happen. So let's simulate out the next few fractions of time based on this perception of information we got to maybe forecast what we're going to do. And then did the thing happen that we thought was going to happen? If it did, okay, it's positive reinforcement. And we do this thing all over again, right? This kind of this kind of feedback mechanism loop that's going on. So if it's something, see here. So if it's something we've seen before, we just go right, add it back to the bank, re-simulate again. Did we get the expected results? And we go, yeah, we did, right? So we're kind of querying this in a simplest way. So I like to think of it as like, so you hear a door open, right? And without you being the person that used to open the door. So we're pretty quickly going to assume that there's probably a person there, right? Or maybe it's windy. Maybe the door is on the outside of the house. So we hear the door, we assume, oh, it must be windy. It is windy. Okay, the wind blew the door open, right? Or, oh, hell no, right? It's not windy. The door just opened by itself. Right, it's a ghost, right? So we evaluate this, and it either reinforces our perception system or it takes it down a notch. So I like to think now, so what if multiple doors, right, are always opening themselves? We really start to question things or question our sanity, right? Like, why do these doors keep opening? This is getting really weird. However, if it's just one door with that old door sound opening itself time and time again, it must be time to replace that latch, right? If something's wrong with the door, the latch is broken, right? So we come to a different conclusion around that experiences. So now what happens if we apply some VR concepts to this? And you'll see it's just basically going to add to it. It's not really going to do much of a difference, and at least to how we perceive it right now. Here it is. So it's just kind of an overlay, right? And so when we look at VR in this space, right, we can even use this example in this room. So we have gravity here, but why, right? Why do we have gravity here? Because that's what we're used to, right? I can show you a laser scan of a real thing, but then I can display it in VR, and my sensory perception tells me that thing must have been a real place, right? But how do I know it's real? So one of the rooms I've got, we have a laser scan of a dig site, and when you look at it, you go, oh yeah, that looks real, right? And so we're equating it back to, I've seen a hole in the ground, and that looks like a hole in the ground. So this guy's telling me it's a real hole in the ground, it must be a hole in the ground, right? So this whole amalgamation of perception goes back to just our previous past experiences, right? So if you had never had an experience like that before, and here you are, you don't trust me, you're not listening to me, and I'm telling you it's a scan of Çatalhöyük in Western Turkey, you might question me. You might be like, oh, I don't know, I need to find some more information. But if you've seen a bunch of earth before and you've seen a bunch of dirt before and it has a natural look to it, you just assume, okay, yeah, it makes sense. Everything checks the boxes. Let's keep on going and keep our feedback loop rolling in hand, right? So, I hear that thing. It makes a sound like a door opening. By hearing that sound, right, my brain starts to associate the presence of another person, something else going on, right? So has our brain heard that sound before? Based on all those experiences, we're basically doing this all in a real-time fashion. And when that outcome holds true, right, then we just keep on optimizing, right? We're okay, no status quo adjustments, just keep on going. So in VR, these things bleed together. As tech, it's not entirely there yet, obviously, and it won't be there for quite a while. So we generally keep stimulus as separate here, and because we kind of perceive them separately. So like right now, I'm getting some sounds from like maybe outside that I'm hearing that aren't part of the virtual world, and I'm processing that separately, and I'm not assuming it with anybody in this room, just based on my own perception system. So kind of like functioning in two realities, right? The real and the virtual. However, if we get into experiences and the expected experiences, we associate them together. So if I virtually train on an espresso machine in the real world, I'm better at using the espresso machine, right? Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe I've used a real espresso machine before, but in VR, I see this espresso machine, I want to go use it, and then it doesn't work the way that I expect it to work. So that's a bad VR, right? Because we've broken out of the reality of my expectations. So it's really hard to build an application against for. And there's a game god, basically. His name's John Shull out of Carnegie Mellon. So he's looked into how VR experiences have immediately invoked physical expectations. So he talks about in this one particular VR game that they were working on, when they were user testing it, that people tried to use this virtual knife to take apart a virtual dashboard in a car, and they were trying to unscrew a screw. And so up until that point, everything had been very one-to-one, right? So I have a screwdriver, I can take a screw. I have a knife, I can cut a wire. Well, I have a knife, and I want to take the screw out, right? So everybody's got, I mean, at least I do. I build a lot of stuff. I've got the knife in my drawer with the tip broken off because I've tried to use a knife to whittle something and take a screw out, right? So as soon as you were in that virtual space and everything starts to align like it would in your reality and your past experiences, you treat it as real. You immediately make that connection. Oh, I'm just going to grab this thing and start jabbing at it. Like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? Well, because they didn't build that in VR, right? But in the real life, it would have worked. So you get broken from a disbelief. So once we're at that point of immersion and our expected perceptions blend together, and in some cases this can be for bad VR, but what about the other way around? So I love this little analogy and story, not analogy. So I saw it on a Twitter thread like a couple of years ago, and I've asked people about it, and they all say basically the same thing. So usually it's developers, but now we've got enough people out there with headsets that I think you're going to see it with people more and more. So people that have put like thousands of hours into VR, they've all talked about that day when they're standing in their house, and they tried to get across the room, but instead of walking, they try to teleport, right? And they're like, wait, why am I not moving? Oh. So that right there is exactly another example of how physical and virtual are kind of playing off each other, right? So there's something going on there. When we start having those reactions, there's definitely something up, right? So, the same type of things occur on a daily basis, right? I live near a few intersections, 2 cities, and, every now and then I'll hear some gunshots, right? So how I perceive those gunshots? Well, if I was from a quiet part of town, I might be saying, hey, there's something wrong here. This is violating my perception engine, right? So something's up. I'm on red alert. However, if I'm in a bad part of town, right, and I hear gunshots, it's just status quo. Nothing's going on here. Let's just keep on our day, right? So I got to go back to the door again because I keep talking about the stupid door. So that sound, right? You thought of it, I'm sure, as I talked about it. And, I'm sure that virtual door with the virtual old creaky hinges, that old wooden creaky door sound, right? So why do we think alike? Why do we probably all have that weird etchy door that's a little funky or a little off? Well, and you all know what I'm referring to, right? Because maybe it's when we hear a door, right? When we hear it, it's really not, the fact that we heard it is the fact that it's actually not being optimized, right? So when it's not part of the status quo, but at some point that creaky door just becomes part of the status quo. It just becomes part of the day-to-day, right? Because we're always experiencing these things through our senses. We create memories of those experiences through those senses. So we're all different, but if we make some general assumptions about shared experiences and how sticking to those shared experiences and incorporating our senses, we can not only begin to evoke more empathetic experiences, but we can also put you through a simulated experience that at some level hijacks the brain. And we get some very interesting, repeatable actions out of it. And those actions can give us insight into what I would call, the human, right? So VR and where we see this technology going is much more about larger distribution channels, which has the potential for larger impact, positive and negative, right? So way more than just passively watching a movie or listening to a book on tape. So I'll use my favorite example, because these guys do it right. All for the good or maybe the bad. Either way, we can decide later. So, Disney, right? I personally think that Disney has done this the best, by far, than anyone else we've come across on a scale unprecedented. Right? They're precision engineering your experiences through as many senses as they can get, and they're adding more every day. So you walk through their park, you smell the aromas, you see all this immaculate detail that defines your concept of what is real versus what is fake. If you've seen the Avatar world, it's ridiculous. I can't tell what's real or fake for plants. It's absolutely absurd. You hear these sounds that are being engineered to inform your other senses as you move between these parks. They're slowly bringing in audio and tunes and sounds that relate to those experiences that they want you to have. And they engineer that sensation to, for you maybe go grab that wonderful little tasty treat on the corner of Main Street. So they're providing a massive sensory experience full of multiple feedback loops. They're all engineered, right? To trigger, they want to generate you having a, quote, wonderful time, a simulated great experience. And as that you associate those experiences through those wonderful memories, through your black boxes of senses, they hijack them, right? And they're really getting you feeling good, and you want to keep spending more money, right? At the end of the day, you're having a great time. You're turning more dollars over to them. So it's a lot to think about. And I know I've just kind of been rambling up here for a little bit. It's kind of by design. So what I want to do now is kind of pivot to what I started the whole thing with, talk a little bit about what we have actually done. So let's have a couple pictures up here of some things. So we use this idea of playing with the physical space and matching it to a virtual space. So this image here is one of the guys I work with. We built this elevator platform with a railing, all just out of scrap wood. We put a bunch of Arduino boards in it. We have some tracking in it, and then we put you through this like escape room in an elevator. So you have to like open up compartments. You got to call for help. You got to grab a flashlight. You have a fire extinguisher. All hell's breaking loose, right? Electrical things are going down. And we were really trying to see if we could navigate you and steer you to getting out, as well as also getting your heart rate up and heart rate down. So we had a special Empatica device on your wrist that was monitoring blood pressure and sweat and everything else. And we showed some, we showed what we expected. We could get you elevated. We could bring you down too as well. So this idea of like if I see something like a fireplace and it should be emitting light, and then I should hear it, and then I should feel it, right? I should feel the warmth. So when I see like a piece of wood or something like that and I want to go to grab it, it feels like wood in my hand. It has the right weight of that wood, and visually it matches what I have this perception in my head of what it's supposed to look like, right? So it completes my feedback sensor perception loop, and they're not out of sync. That's important. The moment they're out of sync, these things get broken, and then you're immediately ripped out of that experience. So like I see a puddle of water and I hear it dripping, and I get closer and I see it dripping. I put my hand under it and I want to feel it, right? If I don't feel it, I'm like, it's fake. I get broken back out. I stick my head out of this opening and I hear the wind. I should be able to feel it, right? I should feel it on my neck, right? So, and that's the Void. I don't know if you guys have been to the Void. It's a pretty cool full sensory experience. You got all this haptics on, and you book bag and you go running through and you go shoot a bunch of stuff like at Star Wars, and they've got a bunch of fun themes. Again, very entertainment driven, but very cool in terms of capabilities. Yeah, but by trying to build these experiences, we can drive people to act as if they were physically there, even if they weren't, just hijacking your senses there, and basically playing interactive theater in a weird way. So what you've got up here is this another guy I work with, Christoph, and we're working on a flight sim integration. So we've got a real Cessna flight sim front panel that one of our colleagues built, and we've hooked it into X-Plane. We then put in like a space heater. We have another thermal system underneath on the floor, get your feet really hot, and then we hit you with a bunch of fog. And so we're basically doing like interactive entertainment experiences, but in a controlled environment where we can control all that very precisely. And we're trying to see if by doing these types of experiences, can we elevate your training for the good, not for the bad, right? So we have some other haptic devices, one of our little laser scanners here in the corner that I've had a privilege to use. So, all right, so Çatalhöyük. So Çatalhöyük's an archaeological dig site. It's in Western Turkey. It goes back about 7,000, 8,000 years ago. So Çatalhöyük is interesting because it's been a dig site, I want to say, since like the late 50s, and it's still an active dig site from my understanding. So we got some information. We partnered with some people that are doing work out of there. I believe they were out of, I want to say Stanford, and some other, maybe out of University of Pittsburgh as well. And they helped us with, data that archaeologists have dug up. They also had some stuff that they had scanned, and we worked on kind of like displaying that in a very informative way. So like I said earlier, we had some laser scan pieces of real material that was found that was scanned, and then we've got digital models of that. So we had some help with some 3D modelers and artists, and then people like myself. So I've got a lot of Unity experience, and we basically made an attempt to kind of recreate part of that civilization. All right, so there's the real pictures of the dig site, and then with all of the subject matter expert help here. Oh, that's the one. I think that's the slide I'm missing, but you'll see it here. So This is like a bowl that was kind of found from artist rendition. They think it kind of looked like this. You'll see up here our physical recreation of that, which is just an HTC Vive controller in a noodle strainer with a bunch of clay around it, right? But the weight was the important thing, and the one-to-one relationship with the bowl handles was the most important thing. Outside of that, it didn't need much of a change. A grain bin. We made this thing, and then inside it we basically put like 5 pounds of rice, and it's in a siloed container. So as you lift it and pour it, it feels like weight physics is shifting with you. We then tracked it with an HTC Vive tracker so we can match it. So you pick it up, it all aligns, you pour it out, and then we visually show you grains pouring out, and you feel it pouring out, right? Our little block of wood, again, it's just a block, literally a bunch of wood sticks I found. We glued some stuff together. We put there's like a padding underneath, again, with like a controller shoved in it so we could track it. Because at this time, we were just getting our motion capture set up, so we were using a bunch of hacked together controller parts from HTC. And you'll see like this VR thing where we have a leap motion on the front so I can see my little fake skeletal hands. And we have a fireplace, and that's me right there kind of doing this wafting sound, this generation here. All right, so let me go to the next one. All right, so really what we were trying to do was to kind of say, what would a day look like in that village 8,000 years ago? And so we did really a lot of this with the game engine, and the first pass was really just a simple simulation where you could move around the space with your mouse and keyboard. And then I went and took it and put it in VR. And the moment we put it in VR, right, people wanted to reach out. So we're like, okay, we'll give you something to reach. So we aligned this space. So this particular room we're in is about the same size as the dig site, one of the rooms. And then we have this elevated floor because they had an elevated section of their floor. And you'll actually see that in one of the other worlds when you go visit it. And then these various items were laid out in a way in which archaeological thought that it would have been laid out. So we just put them out. When we showed you a fireplace, right, that was in virtual space, we basically had a space heater, right? When there's a block of wood, we attach trackers to it, right? So it aligned virtually. So the best part about all this is we basically set the space, we set a bunch of interactions behind the scenes, but we didn't tell anybody that. So we just told them to follow a simple rule, and that rule was basically that whatever you experience, whatever your senses tell you, trust them and treat them as if it were real. So if there's a wall there, there's a wall there. If the floor has a 6-inch rise, it has a 6-inch rise. If there's an object there you can touch it, right? And without any insider knowledge, people took the wood and they instantly wanted to throw it in the fireplace, right? I mean, we sort of knew this was coming, and that was kind of the intention of that. So what we did then is once they did that, we made the fire visually bigger and we turned up the heat, right? We cranked the heat up. We visually have all these effects going on. So instantly people are like, oh, it's hot. I can feel it. Then we trigger a wood smelling burn. So we got some stuff that's set up on some Arduinos to kick off basically a little controlled fire. And instantly it smells like, pine trees are burning. And at that point in time, your brain just takes over, right? And so then it becomes, what else in this space can I go? So I go grab some grains, right? I'm going to go make myself a dinner. This guy's doing it, right? And so you take the grains, you start pouring them in the bowl. We virtually fill the bowl up. You can then throw them in the fire, and it feels really heavy, right? Oh, there's something on the wall. Can I go touch it? And you could like brush off the wall, and we had like virtual dust, and then you would discover like a painting. There was some animal like big cattle horns. We actually 3D printed this thing. It was like 4.5 feet wide, mounted it right to the wall. So when you walked up to it, you could like feel the horns, and magically the horns were all of a sudden cold, and they could feel all these things that weren't really there because we had just done enough to get you over the edge. And so when I talk about the heat, what's really funny is for a couple of versions of this, we wouldn't actually turn the space heater on, and people would tell us it was hot. So what would happen, right, if we started limiting some of these? So as we started taking them away, and we started taking away those interactions, people didn't really react as much. And that's kind of what we sort of expected, right? I mean, it's kind of like in a lot of these experiences, once you kind of have this perception of what the space can do, I know in this room I can only teleport. I can't grab a bunch of stuff and rip things off the wall. So I'm more likely just going to stand in one spot and look. I'm not going to go get up close to something because it's not enticing me to go get up close to it, right? Because I've already been trained as a developer to know that like 97% of the stuff in this space is just static, and I can't do anything with it, right? So we know that, and we knew that going in doing this, that if we were to go down that road, we have to go all the way because you can't. You either go all the way or you don't. And the people that play in the middle there, it generally involves not the greatest of experiences, right? So where we're going with this for the summer is we're going to do some standard, the trolley problem, right? So we're still working through a lot of this stuff right now, and what we're trying to do is find better ways to anticipate technology bias and how we can remove that with the current hardware. So we think it's done by trying to remove as much of the hardware as we can, so getting rid of trackers that you can feel, building them into systems so they're not visually there. So when you go to grab something, it's not, oh, please grab it this way. It's just pick the thing up, right? And we're really trying to go after a really immersive multi-sensory experience and really get into materials as well. So materials can tell you a lot without actually seeing them. So we've known this by using a lot of like veneer paneling for when we wanted something to have a smooth surface, but also retain a little bit or deflect a little bit of heat. Something that we wanted to retain heat, right? We just make some type of metal or aluminum to it. So for the summer, with a lot of this stuff in mind, we're going to basically take a traditional philosophical thought experiment, which is the trolley problem, and there's a whole bunch of these things out there. And we're going to try to bring the levels of sensory up in terms of immersion. And we really want to see, to see what happens on the discussion side. So what is the trolley problem? Basically, there's a runaway trolley, and there's 5 people on a track tied to it, I don't know why, and 1 person tied on the track to it. And you're here with the switch, right? And you get to make the decision if you're going to make an action or not. There's a whole bunch of variations of this experiment, right? So one person might say, well, I will save the 5 and sacrifice the 1. But then I tell you the one guy down here is a pedophile. And you go, whoa, if he's a pedophile, he's got to go for sure, right? So there's all these very interesting thought experiments. And there's a lot of actual discussion right now in those circles of people, the philosophers out there, that say that a lot of this is irrelevant now. They think that they were thinking about it from the wrong direction. And there's some interesting stuff going on there. So we're going to work with some of our people over at the philosophy department at ODU and try to see if we can see what happens, because we don't really know. We don't know what to expect. We're also worried with some of the ethical problems with that, and I'll talk about that here in a second. All right, so this is the end. So current advancements in tech, we're only targeting ears, eyes, and simple haptics. Some stuff's on the horizon, looks pretty promising. So we do fully believe that until you bring those other senses in and you provide that experience that engages a much wider band of those senses, not only are you being more inclusive, but you're also probably going to be gaining much more than you currently are right now in VR. And in a lot of cases, I think that's going to be doing a good thing. But the moment you start going down this road, and this is what Jeremy Bailenson group has been adamantly saying, is that for all the good you can do in it, you can do a lot of bad. So we know that we know right now we can kind of suspend your slight disbelief, and we can favor interactions that people are familiar with, right? So then the brain takes over and it starts using all the past experiences to fill in the gaps. And this idea of if the space were real. But again, like I said, we really think this is a double-sided sword, and believe that some cases going forward, you're really going to have to have a virtual experiences that we think you're going to have these VR experiences that trigger physical responses, which can be very dangerous. And we're not really talking about that right now, and we think we should be, right? So to kind of wrap everything up, I know I've been a little longer than I thought. When I ask where you are and what is this definition of here, it simply could just be the variability of your disbelief of your own sensory perception engine. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you, John, very much. Everybody give John a round of emoji applause. That was a pretty cool presentation.
That was great.
Yeah.